The guards walked us across the loading bridge in a line of 3, wrists cuffed, ankles chained with enough slack to move but not run. The bridge was a transparent tunnel clamped to the penitentiary dock, and through it I saw the ship that was supposed to judge us. St. Erasmus hung below the bridge like a hooked bone. An old penitentiary transport. Long hull, jump coils wrapped in a heavy ring, external ribs to carry transit strain. I recognized the layout from siege logistics work. The coils were oversized for a ship that size. Pilgrimage meant extra force, extra risk. Pilgrimage in the Empire's law is the sentence that comes after death but before erasure. I'd read that line in a statute years before anyone thought to apply it to me. When a case involves a tear in space-time and a question nobody can answer, the Empire marks the culprit as a pilgrim and throws him at the anomaly. If he returns, he earns another trial. They call the anomaly a court. They call it the icon. It sits at the center of a region spoken of only with titles, never coordinates, the apostate rift. I'd known all of that as an engineer once. Now I was cargo. The guard to my left had the calm hands of someone who'd done this often. He scanned each of us with a short handheld unit before we stepped through the hatch into St. Erasmus. Old siege-era tech, built to detect concealed reactive material and shunts. The Empire trusted condemned men even less than enemy miners. Inside the ship, the first thing was light. Flat, functional panels in the ceiling, each a slightly different white, as if nobody had bothered to match supply runs. An officer waited near the bulkhead in a thin Imperial Magistrate badge, the kind assigned to sentences that touched unusual phenomena. He surveyed us like a shipment he'd ordered and found slightly disappointing. "Pilgrims." The guard captain shifted beside him. The magistrate flicked a hand. "You already know your sentence," he went on. "You know your chance. One petition before the icon. One day in history, cut, stretched, or rewoven if your case is accepted. It won't be accepted, but you'll travel, and your data will serve doctrine and science." The guard behind me snorted. The magistrate ignored him. "You'll follow the chaplain's instructions during approach and audience. Obedience may improve your standing, if you return." He glanced at a pad, then pointed one by one. Digby Cale, Rickson Cord, Buller Talm, Neville Dorian, Wilf Penrose, Mickey Bran. Step forward when called. The rest of you are crew or guard. Your duty is to keep this hull intact long enough to reach the rift. When he said my name, I stepped. His gaze traced the faint service patch still visible on my prison fatigues, the pale ghost of commendation bars. "Siege engineer." I kept my face still. "You're aboard as advisory asset on structural risk. Treat that as part of your sentence." He moved on. Buller Talm, heavy shoulders, close-cropped hair, the type who'd spent a life giving orders with his fists. Rickson Cord, eyes lingering on each hatch and intersection, measuring angles by reflex. Neville Dorian, neat, precise, the posture of a surgeon who liked working under pressure. Wilf Penrose, thinner than prison food should allow, a navigator's calm under pirate tattoos smudged by time. Mickey Bran, younger than most of us, shaven bare, gaze fixed somewhere near his boots. We were all here for the same reason. Men the Empire didn't want to keep but refused to waste. The rift solved that. They uncoupled the chains once we were inside. A monotone recording listed emergency procedures for hull breach and corridor failure, all neutral language. Nothing about how a breach during pilgrimage usually meant being peeled out of the corridor in pieces. A guard gestured us forward along a main artery where armored doors led to pilgrim cells, crew quarters, sealed decks. On the right, a heavy bulkhead carried warning sigils, a black diamond overlaid with the imperial sign for restricted anomalies. Under it, a simple label, Cargo Vault Beta. The vault had more than a door. Reinforcement ribs wrapped it. Extra locks overlapped the standard ones. Someone had mounted sensors in triplicate at the frame. The cabling bypassed the local junction and ran straight into the ship's spine where the jump coils sat. That was fortified far beyond standard cargo treatment. Wilf walked near me, rubbing his wrists where the cuffs had been. "That vault," I murmured. He kept his gaze ahead. "Offering," he answered. "Some relic from a colonial war. Official story." "Official stories are for people without clearance." He smirked, brief and sharp. "Unofficial. They pulled it from a dead station near a minor tear. Men started seeing their own crimes walk the corridors. Command sealed the reports and passed the relic to Doctrine. Doctrine studied anomalies and built rituals around them. Part church, part physics bureau, part internal police. If they'd shipped a relic here, they wanted to see what it did near the icon. A good siege engineer gathers information early, before shells start landing. The vault joined the mental map I was already building. Notable faces, weapon lockers, which corridors used older plating. The guard pushed us into our assigned cells. Narrow boxes with 2 bunks, a single strip of light, 1 panel for water and temperature. When I leaned against the frame, I felt a faint flex. Old hull, well-maintained, plating clean, every visible fastener tight. I sat on the lower bunk and rested my hands on my knees. In my mind, I built the dome again. The dome had been a pressure structure on a frontier world, a fully enclosed colony under thin air. I'd ordered the emergency vent controls triggered when rioters seized the outer ring and sabotaged fire breaks. Crack the dome, lose everyone, stop the insurrection in one move. That was the logic at the time. I tried to remember that moment without remembering faces. Memory never listens. I saw a hand smack the inside of the observation glass, fingers splayed. I saw the pressure indicator climbing into the red band, the seconds between command and collapse. Doctrine later deemed my choice procedurally valid and politically catastrophic. The Empire buried the record, pinned decorations on me, then stripped my rank and loaded me on a pilgrim ship where no one would hear my case again. "Pilgrims!" a new voice called from the corridor. A man in simple grey robes walked down the line of cells. He carried a slender metal staff engraved with imperial sigils. His head was shaved clean. A band of circuitry wrapped his throat, lights blinking a steady rhythm. "I am Chaplain Wilfred," he told us. "I serve Doctrine and the Icon. You'll attend litany in the chapel before we enter jump proper. Dress in what you have. You don't need finery to be judged." The guard unlocked our cell. I rose. The ship thrummed around us like a living machine bracing for a hard push. The chaplain's staff tapped a slow pattern on the deck, more metronome than holy symbol. We followed him toward the ship's heart. The chapel of St. Erasmus sat inside the central corridor, ringed by the jump coils. No windows. The ceiling showed a projection of the apostate rift from Doctrine's approved scans, a ragged darkness in space, encircled by metallic rings studded with spikes. It rotated slowly overhead, an artificial sky of judgment. We sat on narrow benches. Pilgrims and crew shared the same space, separated by nothing but habit. Guards lingered along the walls, hands near their sidearms. Wilfred stepped to the center. He touched his staff to a recessed pad, and the band around his throat brightened. When he spoke, the implant layered his voice with a faint harmonic. Doctrine hardware, given to those who served as a mouthpiece between Empire and Anomaly. "The icon hears through proximity," he intoned. "It weighs patterns, not spoken pleas. It sees days as shapes, lives as curves, choices as structures. The Empire sends its broken here for judgment and for calibration." I'd written part of the language in that litany years ago, when Doctrine asked engineers to turn temporal models into religious phrases. Wilfred lifted his staff. "Each of you made a day the Empire can't file cleanly, a day where your choice tore something larger than a person. You'll carry that day with you into the corridor. You'll present it to the icon. If it accepts your petition, That day may be removed, rewound, or revised. A guard shifted his weight, boots scuffing metal. More often, Wilfred went on, the icon doesn't accept. Then your trial still serves. Your data adds to Doctrine's understanding. The Empire thanks you for your contribution. A few crew laughed once, brittle. It died fast. Wilfred gestured toward the ceiling projection. The rift is a tear, he said, a wound where causality thins. Around it lies the icon, a structure of unknown origin. You'll see only fragments, enough to know your lives are narrow, and your days are small weights on longer scales. He moved on to procedure. No screaming during jump, no tampering with seals, no stepping onto sacramental decks without clearance. The jump initiation sequence started under his words. Overhead, the projection of the rift paused, then faded into a status feed. Countdown. Rows of figures rolled downward, time markers confirming alignment between ship clocks and the corridor map. The last line froze. For the space of my held breath, 2 different readings appeared for the same instant, left and right. Minor desynchronization. Then the numbers snapped back into agreement, and the feed moved on. Wilfred tapped his staff, finishing the litany. Jump. The world tipped sideways. Entering a corridor never quite feels like gravity. It's like stepping onto a moving walkway blindfolded. Balance lurches for half a heartbeat, then resets. The lights dimmed for a blink and steadied. St. Erasmus had left normal space. The corridor held us now, a mapped path through something Doctrine didn't understand but used anyway. On the way back to our cells, Wilf slid in beside me. Did you see that in the chapel? I asked, low. Which part? The time feed, mismatch. Minor, he muttered. The corridor around the rift is noisy. Wilfred's charts are old. Somebody probably fudged alignment to hide it. He grimaced. If he knew how close this route passes to Nullspace, he'd be in a different cell, far from us. Nullspace, the haze around certain anomalies where coordinates go unreliable. I'd worked on platforms skirting those edges. Sensors reported nonsense distances. You learn to trust structural load more than maps. The Empire had picked a risky path on purpose. Pilgrims were expendable, ships were not. Back in my cell, I lay on the bunk and rebuilt the dome in my head. This time I held focus on the control room, not the settlement below. Consoles curving glass, the pressure indicator. A clean mental image to test what came next. If the icon truly used days as shapes, then my day at the dome already existed near the rift, a stain in whatever machinery waited there. I wondered how clearly it remembered my hand on the control, the timestamp on the order, the way I'd avoided looking at the lower monitor showing the settlement level by level. I closed my eyes and listened to the ship. Pumps, fans, the low churn of a large hull at work. Every sound had a purpose. Every part carried a load. That made sense. Anomalies didn't. Sleep found me like an ambush. I woke in darkness. For a breath, I thought the power had failed. Then a strip of red emergency light slid on. The wall panel still worked. The chrono showed mid-cycle. The cell door stood open. First thought, breach. Second, opportunity. I stepped into the corridor. A few other doors stood ajar. Rickson peered out, one eye visible, wary as a cornered animal. Across the way, Mickey crouched by his bunk, clutching a pipe he'd worked free from somewhere. A guard strolled past, armor plates scraped from long use. "Stay in your cells," he ordered, not even turning his head. "Systems glitch. Reset in progress." I looked past him. The chrono at the end of the corridor showed a different time than my panel. Off by hours, not minutes. "Your clock," I called. "Check it." He glanced at the far display, then at the band on his wrist. "Reset in progress," he repeated, louder. His face no longer matched his voice. The emergency strip gave way to the full ceiling panels. Doors slid shut on their own, mine included. The chrono on my wall blinked through a brief sequence and settled on the same time as the hall. Minor desync, my training muttered. The corridor around the rift distorted timing. The system compensated. Systems didn't normally open prison doors to do it. I stood for a while with my hand on the bulkhead, feeling the rhythm under my palm. The vibration had picked up a hitch, a little catch every so often. The mechanical version of a man clearing his throat. I filed that detail. Pattern mattered. Pattern caught failure before failure killed you. When they opened the cells again for food, hours later, the corridor looked normal. The light didn't stutter. The chrono kept steady. The only trace of the glitch was a bruise along the guard's jaw, as if he'd walked into a door that wasn't where he expected. The mess smelled of boiled protein and stale air. Trays, bowls, men, lines. A cluster of crew sat apart from us. One, a cargo handler with a scar across his cheek, talked too loudly about the vault decks. His hands trembled as he set down his cup. "Door seals keep flagging open," he complained. "We patch one, another trips. Feels like the vault is breathing." Neville lifted an eyebrow. "Metal doesn't breathe." The handler raked a hand through his hair. "Then something in there does. It keeps knocking the locks out of sync." A guard glared. He fell silent, but his knee bounced under the table. The call came over ship-wide speakers. Clipped alarm. Terse command to security and medical. The voice pushed through the walls without comfort. "Cargo deck beta, structural incident. Response team to Station 7. I was in my cell. I felt the vibration shift as heavy equipment spooled up below. My fingers itched to go see. Old habit. You hear an alarm, you move toward it. On sieges, the first man to inspect a breach lived longer than the man who waited for a report. The door stayed shut. I waited one cycle, another. Eventually the ship settled into a new routine. On a pilgrim transport, routine just meant fewer alarms for the moment. When the guards finally walked us out, they didn't explain. They never explained to dead men walking. But news leaks through posture and half-heard words. Passing a maintenance hatch, I saw a smear of dried blood where a glove had tried and failed to wipe it clean. The smear trailed around the corner. In the mess, Wilf dropped onto the bench across from me. "They lost a man on the vault deck," he muttered over his bowl. "Accident." His mouth twisted. Pressure frame crushed him between containers. Frames don't move on their own when the locks read stable. "How do you know the locks read stable?" He tapped his temple. "They dragged me down to check corridor data. The path twisted around us like a bent rail. Drives are holding, but the edges are fraying." Fraying how? Time stamps with different values on the same sensor. Cameras recording segments twice. Feels like pushing a hull through bad ice. Every meter, something scrapes. I disliked that metaphor. He knew. "Doctrine still wants us on course," I guessed. "Of course," he sniffed. "We're far enough in that turning back costs more than pushing on. Men like us exist for this point on the graph." The cargo handler sat alone at another table, staring at his hands. He reached for his drink, misjudged the distance, knocked it over. His gaze never left the tabletop. When we filed out, I noticed a faint mark on his neck. An emergency collar bruise, the kind left when you drag a man through high-gravity corridors. They must have used it in the last incident. That evening, on the way back to my cell, the patrol route passed near Vault Beta. The warning sigils burned brighter. Welders had slapped extra bracing across the door. The new metal still bore ragged edges, unsmoothed, the work of someone who panicked and jammed supports wherever they fit. It reminded me of early siege days, when frightened civilians nailed anything they could across windows without realizing they were just building shrapnel. The cargo handler died 2 days later. Time in the corridor turned unreliable fast. That morning I woke certain I'd overslept. My body carried the ache of too long on duty. The chrono on my wall still showed one standard night. The corridor display outside agreed. Whatever the rift was doing to time, the The ship's systems clung to their schedule. Another alarm. Different tone, same clipped voice. Medical and security to mess. Priority. They let us out anyway. Maybe they hoped condemned men could help pin down a crewman. The mess was half empty. Guards ringed one table. In the middle, the cargo handler stood barefoot on a bench, staring at something only he could see. "They're in the walls," he insisted, voice raw. "In the beams, in the seals. He's here. My brother's here." A guard reached for him. He jumped. He went straight for the panel that controlled environmental seals on the outer hull, ignoring doors and people. His fingers moved over the controls with the ease of long practice. I knew the sequence. It echoed the emergency vent protocol of a dome. "Stop him!" I snapped. Buller moved first, driving him down. One hand clamped the man's wrist, the other pressed between his shoulders. The handler hit the floor. A spoon skittered away. Guards grabbed his legs. "Who's in the beams?" a guard asked. The handler sobbed. "He was under the dome when it cracked. I saw the footage later. I saw him look up at the glass. He's in that vault now, pushing against the locks." His brother. One of the dome dead. I didn't ask which dome. Not every breach had been mine. A medic jabbed an injector into his neck. His muscles slackened. The guards carried him out. Neville watched them go. "He's hallucinating," he concluded. Isolation from his own work, the route, the sentence. Minds bend under pressure. I'd watched many minds bend. This bent differently. The man had gone straight for a sequenced panel and nearly finished a precise override he should never have had access to here. Later, passing Vault Beta, I glanced at the new welds. One reinforcement rib bore a line of faint indentations along the inside, evenly spaced, matching the spread of fingers pressed again and again against solid metal. No tool had made those marks, only sustained pressure. I set my palm to the bulkhead. The metal was cold. Whatever pressed at those locks wasn't the man's brother, but it mimicked something he recognized. The Empire would call it data. The first full construct I saw moved like memory. Security pulled 3 of us from our cells for a controlled inspection. Wilfred insisted on coming. Buller came because he outranked the other guards. Neville for medical response. I because someone remembered my manifest line. Advisory on structural risk. Rickson trailed along uninvited, a shadow drawn by trouble. The lift shuddered as it passed through a misaligned region of hull, the way a poorly seated rail jolts a passing cart. The doors opened on a corridor patched with fresh plates over older metal. Emergency field generators had worked hard here. Frost traced certain seams. Yellow tape sagged across a bulkhead at the far end, then tightened, then sagged again, as if whoever placed it hadn't decided how wide to make the perimeter. Buller tore it aside and keyed the door. "Stay behind the line," he warned. "Don't touch anything until I clear it." The door slid open. The cargo bay beyond had once been standard storage. Racks of containers, wall clamps, a maintenance track around the perimeter. All of that remained. The centerpiece had changed. In the middle of the bay stood a structure built from torn cargo frames, shredded suits, broken maintenance drones, and the remains of 2 men. The parts weren't scattered. They'd been arranged. An overturned frame formed a barricade. Behind it, torsos and metal panels clustered into crouched shapes. Limbs reached through gaps, joints bent at angles that made my own ache in sympathy. One arm ended in a spray of wire strands plugged into a torn control panel. A head, what remained of one, jutted from the side, neck fused into conduit. The layout matched, with disturbing precision, a prison wing I'd once seen on a briefing holo. Riot scenario. Rickson's unit. I glanced at him. His face had gone chalk pale. His eyes traced each brace and angle. "That's E-block," he whispered. I'd read that report. It glossed over how many inmates died when his unit retook the wing. The construct shifted in a deliberate repositioning. One bent arm folded inward, then stretched so the gloved hand bones pointed at us. The fused head turned, tracking movement. The panel at its base flickered. A faint status graph crawled across its surface. Buller lifted his weapon. "Hold," I snapped. "If you blast it loose, you feed it more material. We contain first, then burn controlled." His stare was flat. "It already ate 2 of my men. It'll eat more if you give it more bodies." Neville crept to the bay's edge. "The remains are recent," he observed. "No sign of primary decay. Whatever did this worked fast." Wilfred clutched his staff. "The icon tests us," he murmured. "It shapes our sins into monuments." I studied the layout again. The barricade, the firing lines, bodies in the angles where prisoners would have fallen. "Not a monument," I muttered. "A diagram. It's learning geometry from us." Buller snorted. "What does that change? It moves, we shoot." The construct stepped. A bundle of limbs and metal pushed against the deck as one. The structure lurched forward, then steadied. Parts broke under the strain with wet pops and scraping, then slid back into new slots. A guard panicked and fired. The round snapped a protruding limb. Fragments flew, flesh and metal. Nearby material flowed in, sealing the gap. The mass grew a little. "Back," I ordered. "Out of the bay, now." Buller advanced anyway, firing controlled bursts into joints and apparent centers of mass. The structure staggered but stayed upright. It reached for him with a loose bundle of ribs and frames that hooked together at the last instant into a rough, crushing cage. It slammed around his torso and squeezed. Bones cracked. Buller forced sound through his teeth. Guards hauled him back. Neville lunged in with an injector, found exposed skin and drove the needle home. He moved by reflex. He'd seen too many broken men. "Seal it," I ordered. "We don't fight this in the open. Empty the air, drop the pressure, isolate the bay." Wilfred bristled. "The relic is on this deck," he protested. "The offering mustn't be harmed." "We can lose this chamber or the ship." I caught Mickey's eye. He'd followed us down, eyes wide. "Panel there." I pointed to a control station outside the bay. "Override local safeties. Force a compartment purge." He hesitated, hands hovering above the controls. "Do it." He keyed the sequence with fumbling fingers. Inside the bay, emergency lights shifted. Warning glyphs crawled along the walls. Guards dragged Buller into the corridor. Neville hit the door control. Through the small viewport, we watched pressure fall. The construct folded inward and collapsed, joints failing in thin atmosphere. Bits rattled across the floor and lay still. The 2 bodies inside it stayed still. Buller slumped against the bulkhead, gasping through reddened teeth. Several ribs had caved inward. His chest rose and fell unevenly. "Don't celebrate yet," Neville murmured. "We haven't cut the infection out. We only starved this piece." Wilfred's knuckles whitened around his staff. "The icon sees this," he whispered. "It sees our choices. It weighs them." I watched the fallen structure, every element mapped to E-block in my memory. "It isn't watching," I muttered. "It's learning how to arrange things." After that, the ship changed. The changes came in at the edges of routine. A corridor you'd walked yesterday would be 1 door shorter today. Bulkhead smooth where an entrance used to be. A stairwell gained an extra landing. A maintenance shaft kinked where it had been straight. Plates overlapping in patterns that matched diagrams from someone's past. The ship carried our crimes like a body carries scars. Each man had his own pattern. Outside the chapel, I found a section where support columns now curved into a partial ring, matching the dome control room that haunted me. The outer wall had sprouted a thin strip of reinforced glass that looked onto nothing but hull plating, yet its size and placement echoed the dome's observation window. Wilf found a cargo narrowway where the angles matched a drop chamber on a smuggling vessel he'd used to jettison passengers who couldn't pay. 2 round impressions blemished the inner wall, the size of faces pressed hard against glass. Neville went quiet after walking through a medical bay whose ceiling had grown extra surgical arms from broken med drones, held in a web of cable. They hung in the precise positions he preferred in his unauthorized augmentation theater back on base. Rickson stopped mid-step in a hall where handrails and braces aligned into the outline of E-block barricades. He froze for 3 breaths, then leaned in to check the fastenings, hands shaking. Wilfred called it revelation. To him, the ship had become a walking sermon, every warped corridor a reminder of sin. To me, it was a siege mapped onto anatomy. The marker in the vault, whatever its origin, was using our histories as templates. It wanted more than visions. It wanted them cast in metal and bone. Containment turned into line drawing. I took schematics, overlaid reports of altered sections, and sketched zones in my head. Some corridors still felt safe for now. Others we treated as burn decks, expended in defense, nobody listed as surviving there past the next shift. I took my map to the guard captain, Judd, whose patience had worn thin. "Seal this staircase." I tapped the bulkhead display. "It runs along 2 affected decks. Cut it. Force traffic to the central spine. We need access to those compartments. Not as much as we need to reach the rift in one piece." He glared, then signed approval. We welded plates over access points, strung hazard tape across hallways that led deeper into warped zones, redrew patrol routes. Every seal simplified the path to the drive core and chapel. Every simplified path made it easier for whatever lurked in the ship's guts to predict our movement. It was a trade. All siege work is a trade. The mutiny began as a rumor. Pilgrims talk, crew talk. Guards pretend they don't, but they do. The rumor said Doctrine had sealed more than a relic in the vault. The marker had once been an active device, used as a weapon in a colonial war near a minor tear. It induced coordinated hallucinations, synchronized contortions, group suicides. It turned whole stations into frozen sculptures of shared terror. The Empire had shut the program down when the device started acting beyond its parameters. They'd locked it away, stamped it forbidden, and wrote strict protocols for future contact. None of that surprised me. Empires recycle their sins until those sins learn to recycle themselves. What actually lit the mutiny was a detail. The pilgrimage route had been altered shortly before launch. Wilf found the divergence in the nav logs, a sudden drift of the corridor closer to the apostate rift. He confronted Wilfred in the chapel with the data. "You're sending a penitentiary ship through a Nullspace band and never told anyone the corridor's untested." Wilfred gripped his staff. "The route was approved by Doctrine. That is sufficient." "For you." Wilf's lip curled. "You hide behind prayers. The rest of us ride the stress curves." The argument drew Buller and his guards. His chest was bound from the construct's crush. He moved slower, eyes clearer. Pain had stripped him down to essentials. "What are you accusing Doctrine of?" His tone carried more threat than question. "Using us as test material," Wilf shot back. "Not for judgment, for research." Wilfred's chin lifted. "Your judgments were passed when you were sentenced. The pilgrimage serves multiple purposes. Saving your conscience isn't among them." Buller's hand twitched near his sidearm. "You hid that the corridor was unstable. You hid the relic's history." "My orders didn't include those details." Buller worked his jaw like he was chewing that phrase. "You're a liability," he concluded. "We keep the ship safe. You keep to your rituals." Days later, with marker influence spreading and more men dying on sealed decks, Buller broke. We'd been fighting small fires already. Guard shifts failed to return from patrol. We checked and found corridors with new ribs, braces, alcoves. Sometimes partial bodies fused into those additions. Eyes still tracking movement. Fingers twitching without purpose. Neville did what he could, closing skin, cutting away necrotic tissue before it crept along nerves. Medicine has limits when the walls want you. The death count blurred. Doctrine never kept neat tallies around anomalies, numbers folded into overall load. I spent my time in the control room near the drive core, watching stress readings. The corridor outside twisted and narrowed, pressing us toward the rift. The planned path had drifted as if some hand had grabbed the projection and dragged it closer to center. I cornered Wilf at the nav console. "This bend," I tapped the display. "Natural." "Nothing about the rift is natural," he said. "But this isn't from Doctrine's model. Something's pulling the corridor toward the icon." A word rose in my throat. I swallowed it. Easy to say the icon wanted us. That was Doctrine's language. I translated into mine. "The stress gradient steeper than forecast. Stay on this line and the ship tears along its spine before we can petition." "We can try to bleed velocity," Wilf muttered. "Spread transition across a wider region." "Can you?" He hesitated. "Not with standard tools. With something like the marker integrated into the nav stack, maybe. It reads that space better than our charts. Might find a calmer path." Integrate the marker. Dangerous. You'd be wiring a volatile unknown into the ship's nervous system. We did that the moment we brought it aboard. It's sealed in a vault. You want it in the spine. The projected structural load climbed past anything reasonable. Those numbers translated into fractured beams and failing welds in my head. "We don't have a good option," I said. "Just a risky one and a guaranteed disaster." Buller walked in on the tail of that line. He stared at the display, then us. "You're talking about letting that thing into our systems." "I'm talking about directing what's already touching us," I answered. "The ship's rearranging itself without consent. We either ride that flow or pretend it isn't happening until the hull snaps." Buller's mouth twisted. "You engineer types always think you can steer the avalanche." "It's that," I replied, "or stand in front of it and hold out your hands." He left without answering. He came back hours later with a squad and a crate of demolition charges. I felt the first explosion as a deep, blunt shock through the deck. Dust drifted from the ceiling. Panels rattled. Somewhere a support column took a new load with a dry crack. The ship-wide announcer lagged. "Unscheduled detonation on cargo deck. All non-essential personnel hold position. Security to Vault Beta, priority 1. I was already moving. Mickey pounded along behind me, breath loud, hands shaking. "What's happening?" "Buller," I said. "He thinks he can blow the problem open and walk away." Smoke rolled up the stairwell at the cargo deck access. 2 guards lay sprawled near the hatch, armor scorched, faces slack. Burnt insulation fouled the air, sharp on my tongue and teeth. A 3rd guard leaned against the wall, coughing. "They blew the outer ring," he rasped. "Buller and his team. Charges went early." "How many?" He shrugged, winced. The hatch to Vault Beta hung crooked. Beyond it, the corridor had slumped. The floor sloped, the walls bulged inward. Strips of metal curled along seams like peeled bark. Mickey stared. "Looks like something grabbed the ship and squeezed." "Stay close," I told him. "Only touch smooth surfaces. Anything textured might be growth." We moved down, stepping over rubble. The blast site looked like a wound. A bulkhead had blown inward. A section of floor had peeled up. Body fragments lay scattered, some fused into torn frames. The damage pattern didn't match a clean explosion. Force had been shunted sideways. Beyond that, the corridor opened into a chamber that shouldn't exist. An extension of the vault, grown from the shock. Metal ribs and bone fragments arched overhead. Cargo braces had bent into curves that reminded me of the dome's inner supports. In the center stood a pillar of layered plate and flesh, cables sprouting from its surface like nerves. At its core, half visible through shifting segments, lay the marker. Officially, the marker was a monolith, tall, narrow black metal, ridged and sharp. The catalog language was neutral. None of it mentioned how looking at it felt like remembering a disaster you hadn't yet lived. Here, it had changed. The once smooth surface now carried shallow grooves, tracing the layouts I'd seen in the altered corridors. Prisons. Operating theatres. Domes. Buller lay near the base. Or part of him did. From the waist up, he was intact enough to recognize. Dented armor, face locked in fury. Below the waist, his body merged into the pillar, fused into layers of plate and tissue. His legs had become supports. He still breathed. His chest rose in ragged beats. His eyes tracked us. His mouth worked, but nothing came out. Neville knelt beside him, hands moving automatically over vitals. "You won't pull him free," I warned. "Anything you cut here shifts load somewhere else." He worked another moment, then sat back. "He dies if we leave him," Neville muttered. "He dies if we cut him away. The structure uses his spine." Mickey gagged and turned aside. The marker pulsed with a faint inner glow, more a sliding darkness than light, shades moving along the grooves. With each pattern shift, pressure built behind my eyes. Images flashed. The dome, E-block, the smuggler's drop chamber, overlaying this room and then gone. The marker thought, or simulated it. Wilfred arrived, staff clutched tight, guards at his heels. He looked at Buller once, then at the marker. "You've damaged the offering," he breathed. "The offering damaged itself," I answered. "You brought it aboard." His gaze snapped to me. "You engineered the dome." "The dome is why Doctrine trusts me with patterns," I replied. "I know what happens when one decision rearranges too much at once." He jabbed his staff toward the pillar. "This is the Icon's fragment. It reacts to us. It sees our guilt." "It uses our guilt as scaffolding," I countered. "There's a difference." Wilf slipped in, eyes going wide at Buller. "You see," he muttered, to no one in particular. "Feed it force. It spends it on new construction." I stepped closer to the marker and stopped where the air suddenly felt heavy, in a way no gauge would catch. "We plug this into the ship's spine," I said to Wilf and to myself. "Give it limited access, enough to read the corridor outside. Build hard physical guards so it can't reach life support or weapons. Let it show us the path of least resistance to the rift." Wilfred recoiled. "You would tether the Icon's fragment to ship systems." "We tether it now with hull and distance," I replied. "We're already between its teeth. This lets us steer which way it choose." Mickey stared at me like I'd suggested we open the hull and walk outside. "Can we do that?" he asked. "Yes," Wilf answered, scanning the pillar. "We give it a narrow sensory alphabet. Feed it drive and nav data in patterns it already likes. Let it align us to whatever it chooses and ride that alignment. And when it finishes with us," Neville murmured, still staring at Buller. "What then?" "Then we're dead," I said. "Or we reach the rift and petition. Either way, the hull stays intact that long. Doctrine sent us here to gather data. This delivers." Wilfred shook his head. "You're playing siege games with a god." "I'm playing siege games with a machine built around a tear," I answered. "Machines respond to load and reward predictable input. I understand that much." Buller's fingers twitched against the pillar. His eyes locked on mine, sending one clear message. Hatred, accusation, a demand that I go down with him. Then his gaze drifted. We left him there. There's no noble phrasing. We left him fused into an enemy device because cutting him out would kill him faster and compromise our one chance to keep the hull together. We wired the marker into the spine. The operation took hours, though the vault chamber smeared time. Wilf and Mickey ran physical lines from the marker's surface into an access panel that fed straight into the nav stack. Neville hovered over what was left of Buller. Wilfred paced, muttering something between prayers and threats. I focused on containment. "We use mechanical relays," I insisted. "Actual moving parts, limited states, only what a finger could flip. No flexible logic for the marker to hijack." Wilf nodded, intent. "Signal in, signal out, narrow channel." We raided storage for old relay boxes, manual switches, insulated couplers. On a modern ship it would have looked absurd. Here, regression meant safety. The moment the first connector touched the marker, the relay box in Wilf's hands clicked, unpowered. The coil inside gave a small twitch. "Contact," Wilf murmured. Grooves flared across the marker in dark pulses, too quick for me to pass. The relay clicked in response, on and off like an unseen telegraph. We wired that output into the nav stack. The software translated it into drive alignment changes. The ship answered with a low, rolling tremor. On the control display, the corridor path shifted. The dangerous bend smoothed into a new curve. Still risky, nothing near the rift was safe, but within range if the hull held. We added more connections, always through physical relays, always narrowing what the marker could touch. Each gave it a little more say and gave us a little more guidance. The ship began rearranging itself with purpose. Bulkheads slid. Corridors straightened along the route from vault to spine and vault to chapel. Doors shifted between glances. New support beams sprouted, built from plates, braces, bone. It's pruning, I decided, cutting away what it doesn't need and reinforcing what it does. "What does it need?" Mickey whispered. "Us," Wilf answered. "Our days, our patterns, our crimes." Wilfred tightened his grip on the staff. "The icon sees through its fragment," he murmured. "It sees that we brought it lives built on structural choices. Bridges, dams, domes, barricades. It reads you." I disliked being called a bridge. Bridges carried traffic. They didn't choose who crossed. Once the connections settled and the nav stack integrated the marker's input, the drive crew plotted a correction. We'd bleed off stress, curve around smaller null pockets, then ride a tightened corridor straight to the rift. The price would be the interior. Joined to the ship, the marker would continue reshaping decks to its taste. Choice was a comforting illusion. The Empire had bolted a forbidden fragment into a penitentiary hull and shoved us toward a tear in reality. No path out of that cost-free. We fired the correction burn. The ship shivered. Deck plates rattled under my boots. Coils along the hull drained power in controlled bursts as the drive orientation shifted. On the nav display, the corridor path curved in response, drawing closer to the heart of the Nullspace band. The marker, wired into the spine, responded. Grooves brightened and dimmed in sequence. Relay boxes clicked in rattling patterns. The hull rearranged itself at a scale no engineer had ever tried. In some corridors, doors sealed and never opened again. In others, fresh doors irised out of blank bulkheads. Metal around them bore faint handprints, as if something had pushed through. We lost contact with several decks. Their monitors spat static, punctuated by frames of stretched limbs, bent torsos, rooms shaped like E-block or the dome control room, or Neville's hidden ward. The marker held our histories and our layout. Given input and matter, it built. Casualties climbed. I measured them not in bodies but in dead sections that no longer answered status checks. Doctrine would call those silences sacrifice. I preferred lost assets. It hurt anyway. We still held the main route from surviving crew quarters to the chapel and from there to the spine. We still reached the drive core, though the shaft had changed. No straight descent now. The path broke into stages that echoed parts of my dome command deck. Railings, consoles, the curve of glass. Shapes rose from the walls, built from plates and the men who died since we wired the marker in. The shaft turned into a museum of my worst hour, assembled in metal and bone. When we descended in a small team to check drive alignment, Mickey clipped his boot on a step, bearing a faint handprint. Small, child-sized. He jerked his foot away. "What is it?" he murmured. "Just a plate," I answered. I didn't mention the children in the lower levels when the dome vented. He watched me, eyes narrowed. "You know exactly what that is." "I know what it resembles," I said. "Resemblance and identity aren't the same. Keep moving." He obeyed. He always did. That made him useful. At the drive core access, fresh ribs had grown around the original housing. Bone, tendon, scraps of skin embedded in the metal. The hull deck chief, older than most of us, stood staring at one rib when we arrived. "I've patched asteroid damage," he muttered. "Welded stress fractures from drive abuse. Never watched a ship grow supports out of its own dead." "Now you have," I replied. "Doctrine will feast on these logs. If Doctrine lives to receive them." We checked the alignment. The marker had smoothed the stress pattern into a continuous strain curve. The hull groaned, but still inside tolerance. "We'll make it to the rift," Wilf said, watching the feed. "If nothing worse waits inside." "Something worse always waits inside," I replied. "Question is whether any of us get there to see it." By the time the apostate rift came into view, the ship behind us felt less like a vessel and more like an organism grown around a drive core and human guilt. At a narrow viewport near the chapel, I watched our forward sensors finally resolve it. The rift appeared as a distortion first, a place where starlight bent wrong. Then the tear itself snapped into focus. A jagged vertical wound in space, black like dense matter swallowing light. Around it, in concentric layers, hung the icon. Nothing like a holy figure waited there. No statue, no luminous being, only rings. Each ring encircled the rift, built from the same metallic material as the marker, scaled to a scale the mind disliked. Spikes jutted outward at uneven intervals, some straight, some slowly curved. Grooves and ridges covered every surface. Those grooves matched the patterns carved into the awakened marker. They matched the necrotic constructs infesting our ship. Prisons, domes, surgical theaters, riot corridors. Doctrine called it a god. To me, it was an engine made of repetition, using lives as data and days as shapes. As we closed, time grew stranger. Clocks disagreed about the same minute. Some displays flashed past checkpoints before others reached them. Camera feeds sometimes showed events that had just happened, or were about to happen, identical until you recognized them. Wilfred stood beneath the chapel projection of the rift, now pale beside the real view. His staff trembled. His throat band burned bright. "We approach the icon," he announced. "We'll present our petition. We'll beg for correction." The remaining crew glanced around like they expected the walls to speak. Most benches stood empty. Men had died on sealed decks, in warped halls, inside grown chambers shaped like their worst days. The ones left: Digby Cale, who vented a dome and killed a settlement; Wilf Penrose, who dropped passengers into tears and sold their cargo; Neville Dorian, who cut open wounded conscripts without consent; Rickson Cord, whose riot control had turned into slaughter; Mickey Bran, who sabotaged a maintenance bay to kill one superior and took more lives than he'd planned; Wilfred, who buried the results of failed pilgrimages; a few guards whose main crime was obedience. In the vault, the marker pulsed in its pillar. Its patterns ran through our cables into the ship's spine, into the nav stack, into the drive. The ship had become a relay between fragment and source. Doctrine had designed it that way. Officially, our pilgrimage was trial. In practice, we were a research instrument. I went to the command deck for confirmation. The command deck had once been clean lines and orderly consoles. Now it wore the marker's scars. Support beams twisted into shapes like the bracing in the dome control room. Panels sat in tiers that matched the station where I'd stood when I gave the vent order. Even the viewing wall had acquired a subtle curve like the dome's glass. Walking in felt like stepping back into that day, skewed in small ways. The acting commander, a lieutenant promoted by attrition, stood at the main console. He looked older than he had a week earlier. He glanced at me, then at the hatch as Wilfred followed. "We've received a sealed doctrine packet," the lieutenant said. "Imperial cipher, high clearance. Given your prior service, they say you're permitted to read it under supervision." He handed me a pad. Doctrine insignia at the top. Terse text beneath. "The Empire never wastes words on the expendable." The packet laid out our true parameters. St. Erasmus was one of several penitentiary ships sent over the years along neighboring corridors to the apostate rift. Each carried a variant of the marker or some related artifact. Each carried condemned men whose crimes involved large-scale decisions. Bombardments, experimental protocols, structural failures. Doctrine had noticed the icon responded most strongly to such men. Mission objectives. First, deliver the marker fragment within a specified proximity to the icon's rings. Second, attempt a single petition using standard ritual to modify one day in Imperial history. In our case, the colonial dome breach. Third, gather as much data as possible on the marker's behavior near the icon, its autonomous actions, emergent structures, mental effects on personnel. Fourth, ensure that if infection spread beyond containment, it would vector away from core population centers. Erasure of ship and crew counted as acceptable collateral. The packet offered nothing about a marker integrating into the hull ahead of schedule. No contingencies for constructs like the one on the vault deck, or for a ship rearranging itself in step with our crimes. The text assumed we'd die. I passed the pad back to the lieutenant. "Thank you." He searched my face. "Does it change anything?" "It doesn't change what we have to do," I said. "It only changes how honestly we name it." Wilfred hugged his staff to his chest. "The icon will judge," he insisted. "That is all that matters now." "For you," I answered. "For me, it's which pattern it chooses to keep." Only a few of us could still walk when it came time to board the shuttle. The path to the icon ran from a docking arm that had grown extra segments on its own. Metal had stretched and warped toward one of the outer rings as we approached. The clamps locked onto the ring's surface with a precision no Imperial engineer had planned. Mickey waited at the lock, suit sealed, helmet under his arm. "I'm not a pilgrim," he muttered. "I'm just a tech. I fixed conduits. I didn't plan massacres." "You sabotaged a maintenance bay," I reminded him. "You knew men were inside." "I wanted one man dead." "You killed more." His eyes had the look of someone who'd finally counted his dead. "I thought it would be cleaner," he whispered. "Quick, without screaming." Then the fire caught the oxygen lines. Everything burned. I left it alone. He'd meant to make a precise kill and started a blaze, like an artillery strike that hits a hospital instead of the weapons dump. Wilfred joined us, robe streaked with dried blood and patch glue where he'd scraped altered walls. His staff still glowed faintly. "The icon has prepared a path," he murmured. "The docking arm moved on its own. We must walk it." "Doctrine manuals never mentioned self-docking." Wilf's voice crackled over a nearby intercom, thin with strain. He'd chosen to stay aboard and monitor systems. Call it duty. I called it fear. "The moment you step on that ring, I lose fine control of the drive. After that, you're on the icon's terms." Rickson snapped his suit seals and Mickey locked his helmet. "Just like any riot," Rickson muttered. "Step into the block, you're on the crowd's terms." Neville checked his gear, fingers shaking. He'd seen too many bodies turned into architecture. Knowing his own might end that way only made him move faster. We boarded the shuttle. Short-range craft, built for station hops and surface drops, not docking with unknown rings around a tear. Cramped interior, standard seats, worn restraints. As we pulled away, St. Erasmus shrank behind us. Outside, its alterations were obvious. New ridges and bulges deformed the hull. Uneven plating hinted at internal structures. The ship resembled a bone healed badly after multiple fractures. The shuttle drifted forward. The icon's ring filled the viewport. Up close, the ring's material looked like fused metal and stone. Grooves slid and realigned ahead of us like tracks in dry sand shifting under wind. Docking clamps caught a flat segment that hadn't existed moments earlier. The icon adjusted to receive us. Wilfred's throat band flared. "It knows we come," he whispered. Pressure built in my skull, familiar from the vault but wider. the marker's presence, amplified by proximity. The hatch opened onto a corridor leading into the ring. Its walls were made of the marker's black material, thinner now. No visible seams or fasteners, just flowing surface. We stepped through. The corridor curved instead of running straight. Gentle bend, sharp bend, gentle again. Not for structural reasons, designed to disorient. The floor had a faint give, like metal laid over empty space. Shallow impressions marked the walls, faces, hands, torsos, pressed from the far side. At intervals, those impressions sharpened into scenes, soldiers kneeling, rifles lowered, posture resigned. A medical ward in rows, each bed holding a still body. A domed city from above, tiny shapes moving along its ring. We walked past. Behind us, impressions blurred. Ahead, new ones came into focus, always just shy of clarity. Wilfred lifted his staff. "This is the Icon's record," he murmured. "Every day a man has begged to change. Every atrocity, every choice that broke more than a single life." "It's an index," I answered. "An archive with weights." We entered a wider chamber. At its center hung a column of suspended material, a thick stem dropping from unseen ceiling to unseen depths. Same black substance as the ring, studded with ship hull fragments, station pieces, human remains. The marker back on St. Erasmus was only a shard broken from this column. Wilfred stepped forward, staff raised. "We come as penitents," he called. "We bring an offering, the marker fragment, and our days. We ask your correction." His voice vanished without echo. The air drank sound, saving only pattern. The impressions on the walls shifted. My dome control room flashed crisp and clear, overlaying every other scene for a heartbeat. Then E-block barricades replaced it. Then Neville's ward. Then Mickey's burning bay. Cards on a table. The marker's link into my nervous system tightened. I hadn't volunteered for that. During the wiring, stray currents had traveled up my arms through poor insulation. Tiny components had lodged in my skin. Since then, I'd felt its attention at certain thresholds. Here it focused, options pressed in. They came not as words, but as branching lines rooted in the dome. I saw myself in the control room. Rioters breaking through the outer ring, disabling fire breaks, threatening life support. Choices branched, refused to vent and send men room to room, taking large but localized casualties and risking the structure. Negotiate, stall, try to buy time for reinforcements that might never arrive. Vent a limited segment, kill fewer, leave the larger system maimed. Or what I'd chosen. Vent everything, kill all, preserve the chain of stations and depots. The Icon offered a constrained change, a single petition to adjust that day. Doctrine had always sold it as a chance to undo harm. The offer felt precise and far from merciful. It didn't care about what I regretted. It cared what I valued when I rewrote a pattern. Wilfred began the formal prayer. "Icon of the Rift," he recited. "Guardian of space and time. We bring you a fragment of your making. We bring you men whose choices shaped many deaths. We ask you to consider our petition." Above, the column shifted. Segments rotated. Embedded remains slid and rearranged. The pressure in my mind sharpened. Attention pinned me. The petition was personal, not imperial. Whatever doctrine believed, the Icon listened to individuals, not institutions. The marker in my skin translated thought into something it could read. I felt it waiting to carry forward one decision. I thought of the colonists under the dome, the riots, the leaked footage that fed outrage across the Empire. I thought of the tribunals, the quiet reassignment, the eventual sentence that put me on St. Erasmus. I thought of what the Empire did with men like me. Secret memos about which officers made hard choices without flinching, quiet transfers to high-risk projects. We'd proven willing to put lives on a scale. That made us valuable. Doctrine had picked me for this because on paper, I'd been ready to trade many for one structure. They wanted to see what a man like that would ask from a device that could rewrite a day. My options shone again. Reverse the vent, save the settlement, accept whatever chaos followed, extended riots, cascading station failures. The icon might accept, might refuse, erase the day altogether as if I'd never been assigned to that post. Doctrine rumors said the icon could remove men from history, leaving absence where they'd stood, or ask for something smaller and uglier. Keep the dome's vent and protect my career. Let the order stand but shift blame. Faulty system, glitch, junior officer's mistake. My first instinct, trained by the Empire, was to solve for stability, keep infrastructure, limit unrest. That meant letting the dome fall again, maybe with tidier optics. I could ask to contain the footage leak, narrow the riot spread. That would serve the Empire. Then I remembered the sealed packet. The objectives. The assumption of our deaths. Buller fused into the marker's pillar. The handler who saw his brother in the beams. Rickson's hands shaking at the sight of E-block in the ship's bones. The Empire had sent us here not to save us, but to see what the machine would do. Saving Imperial stability felt like shielding the artillery that had just shelled my own position. Mickey's arm brushed mine. "What are you going to ask for?" he whispered. "The same thing you would," I answered. Desperation flashed across his face. "I'd ask the fire not to spread." "You lit it," I replied. "You had your reasons, so did I." Wilfred's voice climbed. "On behalf of the Empire, we beg you to rewind the day of the dome vent, restore the lost, correct the error, leave the institutions intact." His words drifted in the chamber like dust. I fixed on my choice. Through the marker, I asked the icon to leave the dome vent order intact. Keep the riot crushed in one decisive act. Remove my name from the record and pin blame on a plausible failure. Malfunction, damaged sensor, junior officers misinput. I offered payment. Every man on Saint Erasmus. Their bodies, their histories, their patterns. My own survival in any form the icon liked, as long as the official record showed I'd never given that order. The icon didn't answer in language. The column rotated. Segments clicked into new alignments. Grooves rearranged. The impressions on the walls sharpened, then blurred. The chamber tilted. Mickey jolted, a short cry torn out of him. Neville staggered. Wilfred thrust his staff out, bracing against empty air. My vision doubled. For one heartbeat, I saw both this chamber and the dome control room laid over each other. Consoles, railings, curved glass. The pressure indicator climbing. The marker's weight in my mind spiked. Everything snapped. I stood in the dome control room. Curved glass rose from the floor in a clean arc above me. Beyond it, the settlement, rings of HAB modules, transit lines, small supply domes. The sun hung low, its light dulled by the dome. The riot had reached the outer ring. On a secondary display, figures swarmed the perimeter, tearing open maintenance panels, hurling rubble at security lines. Interior feeds showed fires in 3 sectors. The main indicator tracked internal pressure, holding steady for the moment. I knew every detail. This was the vent day. The timestamp matched the memory. My body remembered how to stand, where to place my hands. My mind remembered more. I remembered St. Erasmus, the pilgrimage, the marker, the icon, the offer, the choice. I relived the day with full awareness of what it meant. A junior officer hovered at the next console, fingers poised. "Sir," he urged, "they're going to blow the fire breaks. If they breach the ring, we lose containment for the whole structure." I know. Back then, I'd glanced once at the graph, calculated the odds of containing the fires and the saboteurs, and chosen to vent. It had felt clean, numbers for structure. Now I saw a second graph in my head. The icons. It tracked pattern stability, counted iterations of this day, measured how much variation it could tolerate before a loop failed. I turned toward the junior officer. "Vent sequence is locked," he blurted, confused. "Controls need your authorization. We don't have time to ask up the chain." I could try to route power from the outer. The console shifted. Controls reconfigured in a way no factory-built panel could. Buttons changed state. Displays traded places. The pressure graph slid out of reach. A different readout filled the gap. One from St. Erasmus. It showed the ship. The Vox crackled. My own shipboard voice laid over the scene. "We wire the marker into the spine," the echo muttered. "We let it show us the path of least resistance." The junior officer didn't respond. He heard nothing. The voice was only for me. The glitch passed. The console snapped back to its proper layout. Dome feeds flickered and steadied. I understood. The icon had accepted my bargain in its own way. It gave me what I'd asked. The dome vent preserved and my recorded blame erased, locked inside a looped structure. It split the day. In one strand, the vent order played out exactly as it had. My authorization, my voice, my responsibility. That strand lived in Imperial history as the original. In the strand I now occupied, the console itself pushed me toward the same outcome no matter how I tried to turn aside. I tested it. "Order partial vent," I said. "Sectors E through G only. Minimize colony loss." "Partial vent sequence initiated." The panel chirped. Controls shifted under his fingers. Indicators that had glowed yellow flicked red. Text on the display changed. Vent commands merged. Valves that should isolate segments failed. The system executed a full dome vent regardless. The junior officer gasped. "Sir, I can't!" The sequence fired. Beyond the glass, motion snapped into stillness in the time it took the indicator line to fall. Nothing flew. No bodies, no rubble. Just the instant absence of life on the feeds. Fires went dark. The riot ended. My hand rested on the console. Everything in me recoiled at the knowledge I'd tried to choose differently. The icon's machinery didn't care. It cared about shape. One vent, one atrocity, one clear outcome. The junior officer stared at the screens. "What happened?" he whispered. "System malfunction," I answered. "Log it that way. Note that the controls forced full vent. Attach every feed and send it to Doctrine." He turned away, fumbling with his recorder. The glass above showed my reflection. For a moment, another image laid over it. Me in the shuttle hatch, stepping into the icon's ring. The icon had delivered exactly what I asked, in the narrowest possible sense. Structure preserved. Decisive vent preserved. Blame shifted to a system error. The official archives would show a man who tried to limit the kill and got betrayed by faulty controls. On paper, I was clean. Inside the loop, I was stuck. Time stopped behaving like time. The day reset. I don't know how often. I'd stand in the dome control room. The riot would reach the ring. Fires would flare. The junior officer would press for action. I'd try a different path each cycle. Full vent, early, before escalation. The system adjusted until the command landed at the same point, recorded the same way. Refuse to vent. Order withdrawal. Set a defensive perimeter around the inner ring. Controls locked under my hands. Pressure surged to dangerous levels, tripping an emergency override that vented the entire dome. Sabotage the console. Rip wires, smash panels, damage healed between blinks. Metal flowed. Displays reassembled. Sequence resumed. Step back and let the junior officer decide. I folded my arms, stayed silent. He initiated partial procedures. The system overrode him and vented anyway. Logs recorded control delegation error and shoved blame onto him. Each variation changed small details. My hand position, phrasing, timing between thought and command. The macro outcome held. The dome vented, the colony died, the structure survived, and guilt slid down onto faulty hardware or a subordinate. Between loops, in the thin gaps where awareness slipped, I saw other places. St. Erasmus hanging near the icon's rings, hull bristling with growths. The cargo bay construct collapsing during the purge. Buller's lower body fused into the marker's pillar. Rickson's hands on a barricade built by something that had copied his massacre. Mickey staring at a maintenance bay aflame, realizing what his sabotage had done. Not separate days, branches from a single tree folded together. The icon held all of them. I began to understand my sentence. The Empire had condemned me to pilgrimage instead of execution. Doctrine had dressed the icon up as a chance to remove or fix a day. The icon had offered me a bargain tailored to the man I was, someone who valued structure and status over lives. I'd taken it. I'd asked to keep the atrocity and erase my personal guilt on paper. The icon granted that in the only way that fit its nature. It built a loop where my body and memory formed the support that held this pattern in place. In Imperial history, my name might sit on a clean record. Maybe the official logs mention a system malfunction. Maybe a junior officer takes the fall. Maybe Digby Cale never existed. Here, in the loop, I exist as a repeating component in the icon's machine. My fate is utility, not transcendence. I don't know how many iterations passed before I stopped trying to break the outcome. At first, I raged. I tried anything, shooting the console, shooting myself, attacking the junior, firing on the glass. Each time the environment bent, shoving events back into the groove that kept the archive stable. Eventually, I learned the boundaries. I found, for instance, that I could delay the vent by a few heartbeats without shattering the loop. Those extra seconds never saved anyone. They just reshuffled the order of fear. I spent them watching. I watched the settlement, faces on cameras, the way fire crawled along the outer ring, the pressure line creeping up. Inside that tiny allowance, small variations surfaced. A child sprinting for cover, a man shoving someone aside, a guard lifting his weapon too late. None of it changed the final graph. Doctrine would call that kind of observation blasphemous. For them, the icon watched us. We didn't analyze it. An engineer watches systems, even when he's part of them. In one loop, as the indicator neared its critical point and I stole one breath longer than usual, the feeds glitched. For a flash, the dome view vanished, replaced by a corridor on St. Erasmus twisted into the shape of E-block, empty and silent. I felt a tug, like the icon's attention shifted. Then vent, reset. Next time I delayed at the same threshold. The glitch returned, different scene, the vault chamber. Buller fused into the pillar, eyes gone dull. Next time, the icon's ring from outside. St. Erasmus latched on, half consumed by growths. The loops eroded my sense of sequence. I stopped counting. I only knew that each small deviation brought me another glimpse from the icon's archive, a trade of data for data. With every glimpse, its purpose sharpened. The icon behaved like a collector, not a judge. It gathered days where human decisions warped structures on a large scale. It pinned those days into place, looping them until they fused into the machinery around the rift. Men like me became anchors, each trapped in his own repeating pattern, each holding the shape of a particular day so the larger engine could function. The Empire believed it petitioned a god. In truth, it fed an engine with guilt patterns in exchange for occasional edits that still served the machine. In one loop, I looked up at the curved glass instead of the indicator. The settlement held its familiar pose. Fires licking the outer ring, guards moving, rioters throwing rocks. I spoke, though nothing beyond the pattern could hear me. "Is this enough?" I asked the empty air. "Am I sufficient payment for what you gave me?" The glass stayed mute. The console answered. Its surface rippled under my hands. The shuttle hatch overlay returned, faint and brief. For a fraction of a second I saw my reflection in the icon corridor, walking toward the central chamber. Then the panel snapped back into dome configuration. The icon ignored my words and watched only the loop's stability. I understood there was no way out. Rebellion, acceptance, last-minute sacrifice, none of it broke the pattern. My role was fixed. I gave the vent order again. In a different story, this is where I'd find some crack in the icon's machine, wedge it open, sacrifice myself, and collapse the loop. That's not who I am. I'm the man who chose structure over life and then tried to scrub his name from the record. The icon matched my decisions with fitting mercy. It left the Empire its working dome. It left doctrine its data. It left the colonists dead. It erased my formal guilt. It kept me. The marker fragment aboard St. Erasmus, still wired into the ship, still lodged in Buller's fused body, still inscribed with grooves from our crimes, will keep transmitting patterns back to the icon. The ship may survive a little longer, its corridors twisted into models of our worst days. Maybe some crew make it off in shuttles, maybe none do. Doctrine will receive broken packets and spin new rituals around them. Other pilgrim ships will come. They'll bring fresh condemned officers, each with his own catastrophic choice. The icon will tailor a petition to each nature. Some will beg for mercy, some for erasure, some, like me, for narrow personal salvation that leaves the larger system intact. The icon will fold their days into its archive and adjust its loops. As for me, I stand in the dome control room with my hands on the console, watching the indicator climb. The junior officer murmurs about fire breaks and pressure limits. Beyond the glass, the settlement waits. In a few breaths, the system will vent. I've tried many variations. I know the edges of my prison. The only way out would be to shatter the pattern so completely the icon couldn't use it. That would demand a choice so alien to my nature that the system can't even offer it. I'm not capable of that. So I do what I've always done under pressure. I choose the path that preserves the structure. I authorize the vent. Somewhere around a tear in space-time, the icon's rings turn, satisfied. St. Erasmus drifts, half consumed. Doctrine files reports. The Empire pretends its gods are merciful. And I, Digby Cale, endure as a repeating day carved into metal and bone, a necrotic pilgrim marching in place around a decision I will never stop making.